So you're about to meet with a seller of a business for the first time. Are you prepared? Or maybe you've determined that you want to make an offer, but how do you determine what offer to make that seller? Perhaps you've just closed on a business and are trying to figure out how to add value in the business you just acquired. How do we know when the threat is real during diligence? Check out Chelsea Wood, co-founder of Acquisition Lab, who joined Will Smith on the Acquiring Minds office hours in this video, where she addresses all of these items and more.
Welcome, everyone, to this office hours on Where Searchers Go Wrong, Part 2. My name is Will Smith. I'm the host of the podcast Acquiring Minds. And today's session is with Chelsea Wood, the co-founder and managing director of Acquisition Lab. Most of you probably know Chelsea and the lab, but if not, what the lab is a cohort-based education community for people serious about buying a business. Many successful grads of the lab have appeared as guests on Acquiring Minds. Chelsea's been the managing director of the lab for 5 years, and so she's witnessed the searches of hundreds of aspiring and successful buyers, but she's also had calls with thousands, some successful, many not. So she knows what separates those who succeed in closing a deal, buying a business, becoming a successful owner. What separates those who do that from those who do not. And so today's presentation and office hours is going to be on that topic. As mentioned, it is part 2. So this is a follow-up to the first part that we did on the same topic last month in November. I'll provide a link to that recording in case you missed it. After Chelsea's presentation proper today, we'll have Q&A. So to ask a question, just use the Q&A function in your Zoom. We're recording the session as always, so you'll receive a link to that recording by email in the next day or two, but you can also find all webinar recordings always on the Acquiring Minds website, acquiringminds.co. And finally, some links in the chat here. First, connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn. Then there is the Acquisition Labs Insight course, which is a more kind of traditional do-it-yourself, done on your own time course, much smaller format, less content, less involved than the lab proper, the cohort-based community. But it typically sells for $99, and as an Acquiring Minds webinar attendee, at that link you can get it for free. There's also the link there to part 1 of the session we're about to have part 2 of. And then also, if you are interested in the lab or talking to Chelsea, there's a phone number there where you can text apply and figure out if it's a fit. I did the lab way back in early 22. So it's evolved a lot since then, but even back then it was a tremendous amount of value, and I still am coasting off much of what I learned there. So highly recommended. And as I said, you can also go back and find a number of Acquiring Minds episodes to hear from people who successfully bought a business having graduated from the lab. So text that number, text apply to that number if you're interested in having a conversation and figuring out if it's right for you. I think that's it. Chelsea Wood, you ready?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I am. I will go ahead and share my screen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's call. I will apologize. I'm still recovering. I got sick right after our last webinar, and so my throat can sometimes get a little scratchy. So I apologize if I cough in your ear. I will try not to. But today's topic is really just talking about the psychology of search. So anyone that doesn't know, I am an industrial organizational psychologist. And so a lot of people will ask what differentiates the lab from other programs out there. And I never want to sound arrogant, but I do want to emphasize the fact that the lab is based a lot more in the psychology of the deal because it was built by Walker and I, right? And so what I wanted to do is dive a little bit deeper into the psychology of search. And so this is part 2, like Will said. And so we're going to talk about how to know when the threat is real in a deal, how to prepare for winning seller meetings, how to determine what to offer a seller, how to improve your investment post-close. Last month, we talked about how to lower the risk of your acquisition strategy, why broker outreach email campaigns are a low return on effort, and how to win over brokers and sellers. At the bottom of everything, honestly, but specifically around deal making is psychology, right? I think people oftentimes really look at acquisitions as economics, but it really is actually psychology. And so the first thing I want to talk about that I see be a challenge pretty much for all buyers is how to know when the threat of a deal is actually real and how to keep your hypervigilance under control. And so I want to introduce you to Stan the Searcher. He's been searching for 7 months. He is looking for a recession-proof business, recurring repeat revenue, high margins, no customer concentration, 3 or more years of stable revenue, all the things, right? These are all the things that literally everyone I talk to tells me they're looking for, right? But he's frustrated as hell because he's not finding anything. He hasn't found a deal yet. He wants to know if he should go do a startup or if he should buy a new franchise territory or if he should go back and get a job. Like he's just feeling very frustrated. All the deals are crap, right? And so when he looks at a deal, this is what he sees. So when he looks at a business, he sees all of these threats, right? How dependent the business is on the owner. Why is the seller even selling? If it's that great, he wouldn't be selling. What if the entire workforce walks out on me? What if I lose, the biggest customer? What if the industry shifts and I don't even realize it's coming? What if everything's fraud? What if the workforce isn't even real? Will I get overwhelmed by the learning curve? What if I lose the main supplier? Like all these big risks, right? And so they walk away from the deal. And I just want to urge people to try to figure out, is it actually a real risk of the business? Or are you scared of any risk, right? The most common risks that are associated with buying any business, right? Every business is going to have the same risk. Buying a business is not a safe path. There's really no security in buying a business. We always say at the lab, like, this is the most risky thing you could possibly do. And so the goal of the lab is to help you do it in the least risky way possible. But at the end of the day, you have to figure out when you're looking at a deal and you're looking at the risks, what is possible? So what is a possible outcome versus what is a probable outcome, right? Because this will help you figure out if something is a real threat or not, right? And so a model that I came across years ago was this futures terminology model, and it helps people kind of manage risks and anxieties. And so really looking at something and figure out if it's like, is it possible? Is it probable? Is it assumed that you know it's going to happen? And that will help you kind of weight these things that you're thinking about that are potentially deterring you from moving forward on a deal. Because sometimes I think when I'm talking to people, and I just had a call with somebody she said, I feel like you're trying to talk me out of buying a business. And I am never here to, neither is Walker, to tell people you should or shouldn't buy a business. I'm not here to talk you into it, right? We're here to support people who decide they want to do it. But at the end of the day, sometimes I think people need to be asking themselves, do I actually want to buy a business? Buying a business is, I was just on LinkedIn actually about this last night after I finished this presentation because I saw one of our lab members post about the hardships of ownership, right? And how challenging it can be to trust yourself in growth periods. And it is a overwhelming responsibility to own a company. Like I sit with this every day when I talk to my husband about the lab and all the things that we're doing and the people that are dependent on us. And there is nothing wrong with valuing stability and security. I feel like somehow working for corporate America has become like the enemy, but it's okay to value this ongoing security. It could just be a fact that you have to accept about yourself that you don't have the risk profile to buy a business, and maybe that's not in your best interest. I get a lot of people trying to buy businesses for flexibility, for work-life balance. You can have those things in a job, you just don't have them now, right? And so really spending time to figure out, do you actually want to buy a business? Or are you just trying to achieve a different lifestyle that you could if you just found the right employer? Some real threats to a deal are unstable earnings, right? A history of declining performance, short history, right? A business that's not been around very long, books that aren't clean, revenue that is heavily dependent on the seller, um, a customer list that's like 8, 10, right? So you have heavy customer concentration. Inaccuracy of income reported on tax returns, right? Maybe they're accepting a lot of cash and it's not verifiable. A lack of transferability, or my favorite that we see all the time is like super inflated earnings based on somebody, the broker, being super excessive with ad backs. And so what I want to say is, even if these are all the threats you're seeing in the deal, it doesn't mean you have to run. It just means that you have to structure the deal appropriate for the risk. Like we always say, the reason our acceptance rate into the lab is so low is because I won't take anyone on that I don't think should or can do this. And part of that is we don't work with anyone that wants to use seller financing as their primary financing strategy, right? Like seller financing is a risk mitigation strategy. So some of these risks, if they exist, doesn't mean you have to run from the deal. It just means that this isn't a deal you should take on personally guaranteed debt for, right? This is a deal that you would seller finance or have a strong piece of seller financing to mitigate some of those risks. Okay. And I know I'm talking at a high level about all this stuff. We obviously dive pretty deep into the stuff in the lab, but I just wanted to cover these at a high level to get you guys thinking. So then the second piece is how to prepare for winning seller meetings. It's all about building trust and rapport. I think it's really easy for first-time buyers to go into meetings and come off as like a bulldozer, right? You have all these questions and you need answers because you're desperately trying to figure out if this deal is too risky for you to move forward. And I respect that people are trying to move expeditiously, but sometimes you can do that at the risk of burning your relationship, right? And so your primary goal when you're talking to a seller is going to be building trust and building rapport. You want to make sure that they are recognizing you for who you could be to that business moving forward, right? You want to create a connection. You want to be very genuine in your interest with the company, and you want to kind of open up and foster almost like vulnerability so that you can start to dig deeper into the business in a very non-aggressive way. Like nobody loves to be interrogated, right? But people do love to talk about themselves and their experiences. And so if you get that seller talking with some of these kind of basic questions, like you can dig deeper without it feeling aggressive. It's much more organic, right? Get them talking about what they love about the business. You know, what are some of their best memories, some of their most challenging memories, you know, what keeps them up at night. And then you can kind of dig in a little bit more. But I really urge you to resist kind of this get to the brass tacks mentality. With that being said, you do have to remain adaptable to following the seller's lead, because maybe they're going to push you towards that, and then it's fine, right? You just don't want to push them and potentially damage that relationship. The reason rapport building is so important is because it, as you get them to open up and feel more comfortable speaking with you, there's a level of trust and openness. They're not trying to evade questions, so they're going to be openly, like the likelihood of them sharing more open, honest information is much higher. The minute somebody gets on the defensive, the likelihood of them, you know, not being 100% honest with their answers increases. And so if you're asking people, you know, what inspired you to get involved, you know, what was a challenging time, and then you dig in with probing questions, these probing questions can always answer the 65 questions that you have in your mind that you want answers to in a much more organic way, right? If you have a question about customer concentration, you can find a way to ask a probing question on something they're already asking that feels very organic. And so I'm not saying to ignore your questions, I'm saying to approach them in a much less aggressive way. Because the ultimate outcome is for the seller to see themselves in you, right? You want them to see themselves in you and see the power that you carry for continuing their legacy. But the biggest thing is that you're going to fund their future plans, right? So that you want them to see that you'll protect their thing that they've just built while also giving them what they need to continue living out the dreams that they have, right? The next thing is to determine what to offer a seller, right? And I cannot say this enough. We get so many questions around, you know, what should I offer? What's a fair multiple? And so it really depends in the great consulting answer. So when you're thinking about what to offer, the listing ask price is going to be based on market comps, ideally. It's going to have the seller's expectations incorporated in there, as well as the broker's desires, right? And so that's how they're going to come up with their asking price. But your process is much more complex than that, right? When you're thinking about your offer, you need to be thinking about how much capital you have available, how much your growth strategies cost, what your required income is that you need to pull out of the business in order for this to make sense for you. You need to think about your post-close liquidity requirements, your due diligence cost, your legal fees, your working capital requirements, the cost of inventory, your closing fees, do you need to pay for health insurance because you're pivoting out of a full-time role? You need to be accounting for what your expected tax payments are going to be in the first couple of years. So there's a lot that goes into figuring out what you should offer. But you also need to think about unanticipated costs of the acquisition. So immediately upon taking ownership, you're going to see a drop in performance typically, right? And that's because you've introduced change into this system. We've all heard about the J curve. I apologize. And so you're also likely going to get a lot of requests for increasing compensation, right? So and so said I was going to get a raise, or I haven't had a raise, or I deserve a raise. And so you're going to have to deal with that immediately. You might have equipment upgrades. We had a member who had a truck explode. The engine exploded like the first week, and he had to deal with that. We've had members where, they've had to replace something in that first month. The first like 6 weeks to 6 months can be somewhat stressful from a capital perspective because working capital is almost always less than you anticipate, or is always more than you anticipate. And so there's almost always capital shortfalls in that first period of time. And you have to take all that into consideration when you're building your offer, because at the end of the day, there's a lot coming at you, right? You're going to have the broker, you're going to say, I love this business, I'm interested in moving forward. And they're going to say, well, we already have 4 LOIs and they're all above asking price. Everybody's offering us, gazillion dollars more than what we're asking, right? And that may be true. I'm not saying that, brokers are out here lying to you, but I don't always believe it, right? Because we're all trying to get to our objectives. And so some of this is just urgency, trying to get you to act quickly and get what's best for their client. And the challenge with this is that competition encourages riskier terms for the buyer. So as humans, we are wired to increase our risk-seeking behavior when we're afraid of losing something. And so what I find is when you let kind of this noise impact your offer, you're at a much higher likelihood of making a mistake, because for whatever reason, our brains weight the loss of something much higher than the actual like risk. And so I try to tell our members, you need to remove all external factors from this. And so like, don't pay attention to how many offers are on the table and what they are. At the end of the day, you have to think about it in math and logic terms, right? Like, what are your deal economics? Because you can't risk overpaying for a deal just to get the deal done, because all those things that have to go into your calculations, all of these costs will get negated, right? You won't have you'll either have to not pay yourself as much as you needed to, or you won't be able to invest in growth because you overcommitted and paid too much. Debt service gets to be unwieldy, or you deplete your cash reserves and you don't have any to address the things. And so at the end of the day, your offer is whatever your deal economics can afford. And that might mean somebody out there is willing to pay a 5x for a business that you can only pay a 3.2x for. And that's okay, right? Like at the end of the day, you can pay what you can pay. You let the broker know in an IOI, this is what I can pay. And if they say we're not interested, you say, okay, please reach out, if in the future, if it's appealing, right? You nurture that relationship and you move on. But you act quickly, right? You do not spin your wheels on a deal that does not make economic sense for you. It's not a good use of your time. The last thing I want to talk about, I think it's the last thing, is how to protect your investment post-close. And so everybody worries about what happens if the entire workforce walks out. And that is a real risk, right? The workforce is the biggest risk in a deal. And so at this point, many of you, I'm sure, have seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is one of the most basic psychological concepts, that people get introduced to. And the reason why I'm presenting it to you is because I think when people are taking over ownership of companies, they need to recognize the needs of their workforce, right? The most basic needs is safety, security, and that their physiological needs are met, right? So safety, security, and then can I pay my bills and feed my family, right? And so I think one of the biggest pitfalls that people, like the mistakes that people make, is when they go in and they're doing the town halls and the one-on-ones with their new workers, they fall into this like story that people tell. I've heard multiple times in my 10 plus years in M&A, people giving the advice to go in and tell them nothing's going to change. And they're saying that in a way so that you're protecting these lower two needs, right? We're all kind of acting from an understanding that there's a need here. The challenge is that by telling your workforce that nothing is going to change, you are creating a psychological contract. So we all say that the deal is dependent, like maybe not everybody's written an LOI, but if you've seen an LOI, most of the time there's clauses in there about employment agreements having to be reached with your workforce, right? As a contingency for the deal to close. And so employment contracts are seen as a risk mitigation strategy to protect your workforce. But I feel like your employment contracts is not nearly as powerful as psychological contracts. But nobody pays attention to the psychological contracts that are being created when you're doing this transition. And so if you come in and you tell the workforce that nothing is going to change, now you've created a contract with your workforce. So if you go in and change things, you've now violated trust, which is now going to start spinning turnover. Right? Immediately when you come in, they're going to get scared. Change scares people. It's just how our brains are wired. And so it's really important that you communicate to your workforce what's in it for them, right? You need to clearly communicate what's the current state and then what's the future state. They need to understand that the pay dates aren't going to change, that their rate of pay is either not going to change or is going to go up, or if their pay date is going to change, it's going to be from this to this. Their benefit coverage, what is it now? What is going to be after? Are they going to have to change doctors? Are they going to lose time off? Like, make it very clear right away what's changing. And then I'm including this piece here as I can't talk in depth about it. Maybe one day I'll do office hours about change, but in culture, but operational changes like dress code, hours, office location, those seem kind of arbitrary, but those are culture, right? If you start changing things that directly impact the way someone does their job, that's when you start to see culture clash and things that, you hear talk about how deals go wrong. And so you do need to be very, very mindful about the changes that you're making. But the big thing is communicate it clearly right away, what's in it for them and how are they going to be impacted by the change. It will help them, again, going back to the slide, it will help them put these two needs to rest so that they can actually function at a higher level and protect that historical revenue that you're buying, right? Because your main goal after closing is to protect historical performance, right? You just need to ensure that everything is being stabilized. And so you're going to sit back, you're going to observe, and you're not going to change anything right away. When you're having your initial conversations with member or with your workforce, expressing gratitude for what they've built is critical, right? Letting them know that you are just going to be here observing and learning and listening, right? All you're doing in the beginning is listening, because your team already knows what needs to improve, right? They're going to know because they've been doing the work. They're going to know these little things that can be tweaked and moved and kind of pulled out of the way so that they are able to be more effective. The low hanging fruit. What I find a lot of times is first time buyers will have a laundry list of things that they want to do to improve the business, right? This whole long list. And oftentimes they don't get to the list if they're honestly doing it right away. Instead, they're listening to the workforce and they're getting things out of their way. Like their role is to just remove barriers so that their workforce can be even more productive and more engaged than they have been before. And so you really want to empower your workforce to lead the changes. And so that the whole point to retaining your workforce is ensuring that this change of leadership isn't happening to them, right? This change is happening with them. You are taking them with you on a journey to make the business better, and they are a critical piece of that. And the last piece is just make sure that you're celebrating all of the successes, big, little, make sure that you're taking time to really celebrate the team and congratulate them for the journey. This slide, this is one of my favorite things I've ever come across in my entire career. I have referred to this for going on 13 years now. I love it so much. I reached out to this gentleman and asked him if I could use it, and he gave me lifetime rights in any way I want to use it. I have used this with every leader I've ever coached, any employees I've ever worked with. This is a change curve. Going through change is one of the hardest things that a human can do. But this is the best visual I have ever seen that allows your brain to quickly process where you are on the change curve. And I encourage everyone to print the slide and hang it up wherever you are hanging out during your search and your transition to owner, because you will also be on the change curve. And I know because I talk to my members right at the when they're in this anger and this fear stage, um, right after they buy. And it's really easy to get yourself to healthier places when you're like in this disillusionment, especially in your search, right? Um, or post close, right? When things are in that J curve and things are messy. And so I'm giving this to you guys as a resource, but also as a resource for looking at your workforce, right? Because you'll be able to tell where your team is in the change process by using this. It's just really easy to grasp. I've just always loved it. So I'm sharing it with you guys. The other thing to recognize is that change, and I'm not going to go into it in depth on this call, but change is this change process that people go through is specific to a change. So let's say you change 5 things. They're going to be going through 5 different change processes concurrently, right? And so they can compound and lead to change fatigue. And so you have to be very mindful about how you're impacting your workforce, again, to protect historical performance. Because at the end of the day, everyone's goal is to buy a business, but not at the expense of making a mistake. So that concludes kind of the content that I have to share. Like Will said, as a thank you for attending, you can visit acquisitionlab.com/AM to get the code to get Acquisition Insights course for free. And then if you're interested in learning more about the lab, you can text this number with the word to apply and kind of go through some questions to see if the lab is a fit for you. And then jump on a call with me if you want to talk about it further. That's it.
Amazing, Chelsea. Thank you. Would you go to the final slide? So just the texting one with apply. If people do that, what can they expect? There will be an automated response with a link to a form they fill out, or what?
No, there will be a person named Julio who is the brightest star in my life for the last year. I can't tell people enough to hire resources, but anyway, he will talk you through and ask you a series of questions to figure out if the lab would be a great fit for you or not. And then also get you on my calendar if you think that it's a fit so that we can talk more. He's also great at answering questions because he's been with us for over a year. And so it is not automated, but it'll prevent you from having to go to our website and fill out a form. You can just talk to him directly and he'll enter your answers into our CRM.
Great. So it'll go directly to Julio, a human. He'll get back
Yeah.
in touch with you and you'll likely have a conversation with him, with a human
Yeah. Yeah.
named Julio.
Yeah. He's wonderful. So tell him he's wonderful, by the way. He
Okay.
can.
Super, Chelsea. And then what's the URL again that you said? I'm going to type it for people here. Acquisitionlab.com AM. Acquisitionlab.com. There it is, everybody. Just click that, make sure that works. There it is. Yeah. So that should help people. Super. And then Chelsea, would you land us on your slide? Well, actually, I had so we have a bunch of questions already, of course, and I have my own. So I'm gonna call on me. I wanna sit on this slide for a while, but before we do, I want to go back to the change curve slide that you're such a fan of. I may be being dense, but but I want to make sure I understand it, even though it's supposed to simplify. The point here is, first of all, this is from the employee perspective, not from me as business owner perspective. This is from
No,
people experiencing the change that I as new business owner may impose.
yes, but it's also you as a new business owner. It could be you as a new parent. It could be you as a new married person. Like I have found this to be so practical in all aspects of life, personal and professional. You will likely go through all of the stages on the screen,
As
right?
business
It's
buyer.
as a business buyer, as a business owner. And so for me, it just helps be able to literally show this to someone that's stressing out, right? Is fetal position, what the fuck did I do? Oh, sorry. What did I do? This helps them identify where am I? And it also gives clarity that it's gonna get better. It's just part of how our brains work through change. And so I guess I've always found it to be a grounding resource for any leader that I'm coaching or any employee that I'm talking to help them kind of pull themselves out of the moment and see where they are and where they're going.
Yeah. And so the audience can use this for their own roller coaster of emotions when they buy a business. Then they
That's the
can
first
also,
use, yes.
first use, and then second use is to understand and maybe even share with their employees who will be going through their own change and the roller coaster of that. Great. And the is there a like the blue line and the blue dotted line, green dotted line, and orange dotted line, are those kind of forks like the perils that you should avoid? The point is to stay on the purple and not have what happens with the blue, green, or orange.
Yes, and so the blue, green, and orange are all paths that can be taken, right? We can kind of get off the purple path. And once you see that you're in it, and then you're like, oh, okay, wait, I'm just in denial right now, right? Or oh, I am just feeling hostility. Recognize knowing is half the battle. Like I always go back to GI Joe in my head, but like just having this visual can be what your brain needs to kick yourself out of the cycle,
Yeah,
right? And say, okay, nope, I'm just here. It's not that it's not real. I don't mean to say like the feelings aren't real, but it's not a long-term place that you're going to be stuck at, right? It's a
yeah,
feeling. And so
yeah.
it helps you identify the feeling so that you can then get back on track. So yeah, the
Super,
goal is the purple line.
super. Well, Daniel Fannin, audience member here, has just sent me a link with more on the change curve. So I'm
Oh,
sharing that.
yay.
There you go, everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Great, Chelsea. I just want to just editorialize a little bit on a couple things that you said about as becoming owner. Yeah, to clearly communicate. So this is a cliche, but it's also a cliche because people, it's so difficult to do for people that good CEOing is over communicating, and many business buyers have never been the leader of an organization. They may well have been managers of people and think that being a CEO is kind of the same, just over more people. But I think it's really different because it's buck stops with you. You're the top leader, and really over communicating. Communication is really much more your job. Ultimately, depends on how big the business is you buy. If you buy a tiny little business, you're also going to be doing operations and stuff. But anyway, the point just, if you're not sick of hearing yourself say something, maybe you're not saying it enough. And I think that that is particularly true um, in a moment of churn, change, transition, which is, of course, when you become CEO. So all the more important to be over communicating during that transition period.
And
Uh,
one more thing, Will, to
yeah,
that is how important it is to recognize the different learning styles and the different processing styles. So some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people are tactile. And so making sure that even if you say things verbally, that you're also giving it to them in writing, that you're also putting it in, somewhere in a common area, or you're presenting it visual, like in a graph like this, as well as like a newsletter or a packet. And so, yeah, over communicating is probably the most frustrating part of being in leadership, because you get tired of saying the same stuff over and over again, but you have to say it in a variety of ways.
yeah,
Because, and I'm not even talking about the difference between like, professional versus more, like white versus blue collar workers. It's like individual level, people need to see things differently to actually understand them. And so
mm,
you need to make sure that you're providing a diversity of methods, right?
yeah.
Channels of communication.
So over communicate and then do it in a bunch of different ways.
Yes.
I remember, I don't remember where I heard it, but it may have been an Acquiring Minds guest, but I don't think so. A leader of an organization who overheard employees making fun of him. I think it was a him, for always saying the same message, like, oh, the message that he was always saying. And rather than despair or feel self-conscious or insulted that his employees were making fun of him behind his back, he was like, awesome. I know I've hit the right threshold if I'm saying it so much that people are tired of hearing it. It's like,
Exactly. Like they need
it's a
to be
good
able to recite
standard.
it back to you. Otherwise, it's
Yeah,
going to be like, you
right,
never told me. Yes, I
right.
did.
The other thing I just liked about being a good CEO that you mentioned, Chelsea, and I wanted to just amplify, was removing barriers. Again, depending on the size of your organization, if you buy a tiny business with low SDE, it's going to be different. But if you buy or eventually get to a business of size, your job is less to do stuff and more to communicate and enable. communicate and then enable your team to do what they do best. And enabling often means removing barriers. So it's clearing that stuff out of the way for them in ways that they can't, that only the CEO can, and they'll love you for it.
Yep.
So great. Um, just a couple more things from me, and then we're going to hit the audience's questions. I will just say on payroll, I think you had another slide on payroll. Was it the one before this, Chelsea? Um, yeah, like the psychological control. Oh, yeah, let's leave this Maslow's hierarchy. Thank you. Just the safety needs, those basic needs at the bottom, what people are going to be most protective of or need to satisfy first. So it's also a cliche that making that first payroll or making all payrolls, but particularly that first one, is the first sign of your competence as their new boss, their new owner, their new leader. I just did an interview Tuesday that hasn't aired yet with Io Phillips. People may know him from SMB Twitter. I knew his story, but had never gotten him in the seat. Finally did, and his story, he missed his first payroll. Or they didn't miss. People got the checks, but the checks weren't clearing or something. There was some problem where
Mhm.
people didn't get paid his very first payroll. And I won't say that he could never recover, but that was the first in a long series of things going horribly wrong. So it might have just been a coincidence, and these other things would have gone horribly wrong anyway. But it sure seemed like it was an inauspicious start because things just it was bad thereafter. So it can happen. It did happen to a searcher, and it was a horrible thing to have happened. So
Yeah.
don't miss
Well, and
payroll, especially your first one, people.
I think the nothing's going to change things. So many people say this and only say it if it's true, right? Like I had a client tell the workforce that nothing was going to change, and they literally changed everything. They shut the office down and relocated it like 7 states away. Like, what the hell are you doing? And so
Yeah,
they did. They lost the entire workforce. Literally,
yeah,
there were no employees left. And so
yeah,
like that's the biggest thing you can do wrong, right? Is things like that. Don't make not making payroll, basically lying, saying nothing's going to change when you do actually intend on changing a lot of things for
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. The am I should I make changes and when and how to communicate that is such actually a rich discussion. I mean,
Mhm.
I've heard it argued compellingly both ways. Not excuse me, not the point about communicating. Always communicate accurately. So if you're going to make changes, say so. If you're not going to make changes, say so. Then adhere to that. But whether you change stuff and when is a bottomless
It
debate, and,
is. Walker and I
it's
have
very
gone,
case by case, but
yeah,
it's
Walker
a
and I
good
have
one.
gone round and round about it in the lab, right, in conversations,
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
do have a grace period to come in and kind
right,
of be dangerous, but
right,
that's a really high risk
yeah,
strategy.
yeah.
And when you're personally like, guaranteeing debt, I don't know, man.
And I would just say for people who will hear my guests on Acquiring Minds or will see this debate on Twitter, when to change, when to not, people will come out very forcefully. People who've done it will come out very forcefully and say, I get in there or I got in there and I made those changes because of this grace period. You know, what am I waiting for? You know, whatever. There's already a moment of disruption with me as new owner. So why don't I just disrupt more stuff because people are already kind of like, soft and they've been softened up. The changes happening, so just kind of use that momentum of change anyway. Just always, as with all advice that you hear from people, recognize that that's a data set of one. There's survivorship bias there. It may have worked for them in their case, but that does not mean that you extrapolate to all cases just because it worked for them in that
I
moment.
love the idea that like they're softened up. So I'm just gonna like, is that what happens? They soften?
Yeah,
Like I
maybe a
come in
weird
and all
choice
the
of words.
change. I like that visual. Yeah, that
Yeah,
soften.
yeah, yeah. The last thing, Chelsea, I wanted to just say is I said it last time, part one of this, but you touched on it again. If you go back to the slides or the very first set, I can't remember the slide, the very first topic of today. Yeah, your costs arriving at basically
Oh,
what you your basically yes, thank you. um, Johannes Hawk did a webinar a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. I can put a link to it. We talked about it last time, and his whole his whole webinar was about doing a fast search. So basically in 6 months' time, he bought a business, but he basically had the business he was going to buy after about 2 months. Um, and it's a great presentation, but his whole thing is one of his whole things was the price listed for the business on Biz by Sell. It's got a price listed. This is what you can buy this business for. He and his partner didn't even look at that. Just dismissed it out of hand. They would, in all cases, come up with their own valuation of a business and the offer they would make. So they weren't even allowing themselves to be anchored by whatever price that was listed. So they just work back from, okay, they looked at the business, they'd get the sim, and they'd look at a couple of the characteristics, and they'd say, if it was kind of a weak business, they'd be like, this is worth 2.5 times. If it was a strong business for all the recurring revenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, no customer concentration, maybe it's worth 4x, and the SDE is this, and so this is what we think this business is worth, which is what the big boys do when when bigger businesses are buying each other. They come up with their own valuations. They're not letting the seller tell them.
Correct.
Um, and Anyway, for some reason it was very fresh insight for me, but very convincing. And so don't be anchored to the price that the seller is saying. Don't even, I mean, first of all, don't treat it as the real price, but don't even be anchored to it. Don't feel like, oh, if it's $1 million, well, I got to get close to what they said. No, work back from your own criteria. Work backward from your own criteria. It's pretty cool. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chelsea, for indulging my questions. Let's get into these in here.
Where do you
Okay.
want me to sit? Do you want me to take my slides down, or do you want me to put it on a certain slide?
Oh yeah, thank you. Put it on the acquisition lab slide so people can just be seeing a little bit more about the lab. Okay, here's one, because I know you love psychology, Chelsea. Can you talk about the psychology of different multiples versus asking price? For example, I'm a person who almost always waits for a sale when making a consumer purchase and hates paying list price. Wait for a sale, wait for a discount. Do I just need to suck it up if the list price seems fair? Or how do I, as a searcher, get over the sense that I'm getting hosed on the multiple?
Um, I love this. I feel like everybody feels it goes back to who was it, Stan the the Stan the Searcher. I feel like for
Yeah.
whatever reason, there's this like undercurrent of people feeling like they're getting hosed by multiples. I hear it a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and at the end of the day, looking at comps, right? So we tell our members to use tools like Peer Comps or BizStats or any of the comp data showing you what the multiples are going for, right? I think it's also important to recognize listed multiples versus closing multiples, right? Just because it's listed for something doesn't mean it was sold for that same multiple. But at the end of the day, it's exactly what did you say, Johan? That who
Johannes.
Johannes, what Johannes was talking about, right? You can go and see what the market rate is for something, and then you have value levers, right? And we talk about this in the lab, the 7 elements of a business. And if the business is doing really well and it has all the value levers, then you're going to go higher than average, right? You're just going to continue to be like, okay, yeah, this is maybe a 4.2 because it's got all these great things going for it, or like, this is a 2 because it's got nothing going for it, right? Like at the end of the day, you can't really be discount minded when you're buying a business because you don't want to buy a business that is eligible for a
Mm,
discount, right? Like you want to be buying I am not a brands person. Like what's the bags, like whatever the top bag is that people
mm,
buy, or shoes, right? Like you want to buy that, right? You don't want to buy stuff like an off brand of something that can be
yeah.
sold on sale, right? We're all trying to buy the best, healthiest businesses, because many times we're doing it with debt, or our life savings, in some other form of capital. And so you can't have that mindset. I'm sorry.
I think that's really a good response, Chelsea. I'm reminded of a little Warren Buffett. It's not a, it's actually it's a huge Warren Buffett story, part of his story. When but I may butcher it, but anyway, when he started his career and was buying businesses, his approach was to buy business. This is the metaphor he would use of the cigar butt that it's still got a few puffs left in it, and he was looking for cigar butts that have still a little bit of value. In other words, not great businesses, but are still underpriced for what they can generate. So he was still getting them at a discount, but they basically weren't they were low quality businesses. And actually, Charlie Munger, also of course famous, this was one of Charlie Munger's big influences on Warren Buffett. He convinced Warren Buffett to instead better to pay a slight premium, not too much of a premium, not crazy overpaying, but a slight premium for a high quality business than sale price or a great deal, a great price on a low quality business. Prioritize a high quality business over getting a screaming deal.
Yeah, and I think that's again, I'll say it a gazillion times probably, but the lab is here to help people buy business in the least risky way possible, right? The least risky way to buy a business is to not buy a shitty business.
Mm,
Right? Like you want to buy
hmm
stable businesses that are doing well and you want to pay a fair multiple for them, right? Um, but the economics of the buy then build model do start to break as the multiple goes up, right? Like if you're
Yeah,
buying something with debt, then the debt service starts to eat the entirety of the
yeah,
earnings once you cross like a 4.5. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so some of it just, you have to get pretty creative with deal structure if you do want to pay a higher multiple and you want to use the standard kind of models.
yeah. And you audience should understand how that works, what the math is there. We've done some webinars on that. Go to the website and look into the webinars. But a good SBA lender, hopefully basically any SBA lender, is going to also help you understand what the ceiling on what you can pay is, because it comes down to debt service coverage ratio. And so you can't just keep ratcheting up the multiple because the debt service becomes so high that it's too burdensome, and your SBA lender will be like, you're putting too much debt on this. And the only way you can afford it is because you have to layer up so much debt. It doesn't pencil. They won't underwrite it. So
No, that's also why the 5% down, model can be really challenging, right? Because when you're thinking about DSCR or debt service coverage ratio, guys, it has to clear for the last 3 years, right? So it's not like the current year has to pass, which can be really challenging for you guys, right? When brokers are listing businesses and they're valuing it off of an inflated current year or like a projection even. Um, it's this market is not for the faint of heart, right? There's a lot of mixed quality of brokers and listings, and Stan the Searcher wasn't wrong, right? Like it can be very, very, very disheartening to be out here and looking at listings. And I liked Johannes's um, message of just acting expeditiously, get as
yeah,
quickly as possible to a no, right? And so I would
yeah.
encourage members to do the same.
Speaking of kind of the nature of this market, here's a question. Dealing with an owner directly, so no broker in this case, this searcher is challenged to keep the seller motivated through the process. This is classic
Yeah.
because the seller's got a business to run. What advice do you give people in the lab, Chelsea?
I don't love off-market deals, to be honest. Like this is just Chelsea's opinion, for exactly this reason. So most brokers work with owners for about 17 months to get them ready to go to market. And this is why search funds have the success rates that they do, right? Because they're targeting off-market deals. And so it's a lot of effort. And so if you're working with a seller um, who wasn't necessarily thinking about selling, you kind of just have to be mentally prepared that it's going to take a while. It is a massively emotional, like psychological process for them to separate themselves from their business, on top of whether or not their business is actually ready for sale. Um, a lot of times what buyers are asking sellers for, they don't even have. They've never needed it, they've never prepared it. And so it can be a really challenging interaction, and you're really putting yourself in the position of being the broker and having to pull
Yeah,
them through the process. And so patience, the average off-market deal is going to take 18 to 24 months to close. That's why search funds have the time frames that they have with their statistics. And so you just need to be prepared for the long haul. um, I would, and I think I said this last month, like I would not put all my eggs in that basket. I would be going and looking at other deals while I'm working the off market deal. Um, because it's also a higher likelihood that they won't close, right? That they'll get cold feet at the end because they haven't had enough time to really process life after closing and what that means for them. Um, and so I would just say be respectful, right? You could be persistent, but it's also possible that they literally don't have the time to give you what you need. And so anything you can do to ease the burden off of them or their team is helpful. Um, there's a lot of prep work that goes into selling a company
Yeah.
that doesn't get done yet. And so it's a long process. And so I don't have great advice, to be honest, other than don't wait around. Don't let it drag on 2 years from now and you're still trying to get this person to sell to you. You should keep it the iron in the fire, or whatever the idiom is that I probably just said wrong, and Slack's going to blow up later.
Multiple irons in the fire.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, keep going and get some other deal flow as well.
Yeah. I'll share. I just did an incredible interview last week. More of an independent sponsor, much more of an independent sponsor. So not SBA search deal, bigger deal, $16 million deal, I think. But I will share that this came up, and the our protagonist, Carlos Santelli, everybody listen for this episode. It's gonna be another 5 or 6 weeks, but it's amazing. Um, I'll share three techniques on this very point. So he was asking his seller for some financials. Seller's running a $16 million manufacturer. Seller's busy. And even though the seller, like, wants to sell, but it's just
It's
somewhat
bandwidth.
somewhat counterintuitively, it's never their top priority. Their business operations is their top priority. Even though you're talking about giving them a bigger check than they've ever received, you'd think that would be their top priority. But it's that 2x2 matrix where, like, important and urgent, and you don't fall in the urgent category because maybe just selling their business, even though there's a big win there, it's not urgent. The problem right in front of them at their business is what's urgent. So often, maybe you got a checked out seller, and then they're not dealing with operations. Anyway, to Carlo, because I don't want to take too long. Three things. First of all, he's amazing at building rapport. So get good at building rapport. We Too much to cover here. Go read about that. It's huge. That was
It
key
is.
to his deal. Build rapport so the seller trusts you. Be incredibly speedy. It's hard. I'm not good at this. Carlo, if I email Carlo, he's gotten back to me in a minute. It's crazy how fast he is. So he was never the bottleneck himself, and he trained his seller to just know that he'd get a response back. So always be the one pushing the deal forward, gently, but always push forward. And then lastly, so here's the story. Carlos following up, hey seller, can I get those financials from you? Maybe second or third ask. Seller says, I'm too busy. If you want them, come get, come get them. Carlos based in Florida, business is in Connecticut. Carlos says, really? Seller says, yeah. Carlo gets on a flight, flies to Connecticut, goes to the back room of this factory, to the PC or whatever, and starts getting the financials. He goes into the QuickBooks and gets the information. So two things there. First of all, obviously the seller's only gonna do that if you've already built a lot of rapport. He's not gonna let just some weird person into the. So Carlo was only invited to do that because there was trust already. So that's step one. But if you have that trust, be willing to do that stuff. That's the gritty, scrappy entrepreneurial part of this. Be willing to hop on a flight to go do that. And maybe even offer it. That's super delicate because if you offered that, it might be seen as too weird and pushy. But you can just tell from the Carlo story that there are instances where it happened and it made all the difference. Carlo got the information that he needed, and moved the deal forward himself and helped the seller
Mhm.
move forward. So anyway.
It's often a bandwidth issue. And so anything you can do to alleviate the friction helps.
Exactly. 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 And um the other tactic there is the get on a flight tactic.
Yeah.
If you're not buying locally and you're buying somewhere else, if you can build a lot of rapport very quickly by flying and being treated as a serious buyer. If you fly to them, you're showing that you're serious. Um, so there you go. Chelsea, what are some of the best sources for comps and market multiples? You mentioned peer comps, I think. What else? Or is that it?
So we use peer comps because it's SBA data, and most of our members are using SBA. I know you can get BVR stats, deal stats, through searchfunder.com. If you're not a member of the Search Funder community, I think it's $79 or $89 a month, but you get credits for engaging, and so it's a great community to be a resource for. Um, those are the two ones I use most often. I'm sure there's other ones out there, but I find those to be really peer comps is great because it allows you to search and see if they actually have comps before you buy the subscription. Lab members get a discount, but it's even without our discount, it's still a really affordable resource.
Peer comps,
And
and
BBR deal stats, I think it is.
BVR deal stats.
Yeah,
BVR deal stats. Great. What about
yeah.
IBIS? IBIS has a product. IBIS. No, not good.
Yeah, so IBIS is market and industry research, but they don't have comp data.
Ah, okay. But that's another good one for people to know.
Yeah, so we do a year's membership to IBIS World Premium for our lab members because it's such great market and industry research, and it allows you to build much richer business plans. And it's like 4,000 a year, so I didn't think anybody would pay out of pocket for it. And so yeah, it's a great resource,
and
especially
people
if you're
get that as
trying.
part of the lab.
Yeah, we you get a year's of that, and then 25% discount to peer comps. We were doing a lot more discounts lately. I just contracted 2 discounted packages for due diligence services for lab members, like deeply discounted, which is amazing.
Oh, great.
Um,
Oh,
so
fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Chelsea, we're at 59. I think you have a pretty hard stop. Are we
I
wrapping up?
don't today. If you have some questions, I'm okay answering them probably for another 15 to 20 minutes,
Okay,
but we
great.
can end it too. Totally your
Okay,
call.
no, let's go for another few questions. Um, this is an interesting one. Can you share more on how you recommend people differentiate whether the concerns are like whether these risk concerns are specific to the deal, the particular deal, or just acquisition in general?
Yeah, and so I'm gonna go back to this slide because it's just really helpful to me. So when you're looking at a listing, right, you're gonna see this, right? These are the most common fears that people have about a deal, right? So if you're looking at the listing and you're finding yourself um, kind of questioning the validity of, not even questioning the validity, I guess, but like fearing if we get a lot of people like, and somebody said like, what if I'm getting hosed on the valuation, right? Where they feel like they're getting scammed, right? There's risk that like not things aren't true, or they're scared that like they're gonna lose all these customers. And so to me, the difference between real risk and this like undercurrent fear of buying a business is really whether or not it's a possible outcome or a probable outcome, right? Like, yes, technically speaking, everything that you look at in a deal could be fraud, right? But is that actually likely? No, right? It's possible, but it's not probable, right? Declining revenue, like, yes, revenue may decline immediately after you buy the business. So these are more like fear of outcomes that I think can cause people to spin and walk away from a deal because they're looking at it and they're just their brain is creating uh like fear factors almost, right? Where it's like, okay, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? Those are risks of buying any business, right? Real risks are these things where you're looking at the listing and the financials have been declining month over month or year over year for the last. That's a friggin' risk. That is a real risk. That is a data points showing you that the business is declining, right? Or the business is only 18 months old and is experiencing extreme growth. That is a real risk because we don't know what the stabilized performance actually looks like, right? Or you're looking at it and there's a vast discrepancy between tax returns and the financial statements. Now, none of this to me means you should run, right? Like what happens, I'm going to back up to this guy. What happens in my experience are the people that are actually just scared of buying a business will run from all of those deals. They will think that all the deals are shit because they're looking at all these potential outcomes instead of looking at the actual risks.
Hmm.
right? And again, none of these say you should run. It just means you need to structure the deal appropriately to mitigate the risks that are being presented. But instead, our brains, right, and the way that we're wired makes us want to run and say, all the deals are shit. I can't find anything I'm looking for because I'm looking for all these things instead of picking which of these search criterias are non-negotiable for you, right? And then structuring your deal to appropriately mitigate against the risks that you do find, right? That you are comfortable taking. Because at the end of the day, the difference between searching and closing is finding a deal that has risks that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because every deal is going to have a shit ton of risks. Businesses are risky, right? And so you just have to find ones that it's like dating, right? Nobody's perfect. You just find somebody that has the characteristics that you're comfortable with, right? And so it's the same way. Is that helpful
That
to
was the
give
most
you?
romantic thing I've ever heard, Chelsea.
I'm a very romantic person. I am not logical at all.
It does. It does make sense. I've never heard this framing and I love it. Kind of real threats, real versus perceived.
Thank you.
Um,
Real versus perceived. That's what I meant. You're so brilliant. I didn't word it quite so eloquently. So thank you.
Here's one on Q of E's, quality of earnings. Oh, and then somebody's asking too about if you could share exactly what discounts people in the lab do offer,
Yeah.
enjoy. Since there is a possibility that earnings are being inflated with add backs by the broker, does Chelsea recommend a Q of E report? And follow on, what's your experience between buyers? Can you break down those who've done Q of E's versus those who don't? You might not have that visibility into all deals, but Q of E's.
I like that. Thank you. I don't have visibility in all deals, so I'll speak anecdotally, but I don't think enough people do Q of E's, which is why I negotiated this discounted Q of E package for lab members. So our members now can do a Q of E for like 13 grand as opposed to 25 grand. And it's just to encourage them to do it because it is important. It's not important in every deal, and we do talk about this in the lab, but like some deals that are not overly complex can be fine with financial due diligence, right? Which is just like checking to make sure things match up, right? Invoices accurately reflect payments and all that jazz. What I don't love that I see way too often, and again, this is Chelsea's perception. We have, what are we up to? 11, 13 advisors. They all would say probably something different, but Chelsea's perception is that people are paying for due diligence without understanding what is included. What I don't love seeing is that some people are paying for due diligence thinking it's a Q of E, but it's actually just a spot check. Like they're going over and they're checking a few places and they're looking to see if there's anything that's like off. Um, but they're getting quoted like, 7 grand. And so they're like, well, I'm doing financial due diligence, but it's just a spot check. So you need to understand what you're paying for. Not every deal warrants a $25,000 Q of E, but some of them do, right? And a Q of E is $25,000 because it's extremely robust. And so if someone is telling you that they are charging $7,000 for a Q of E, it's unlikely they're actually doing a full Q of E. We're getting a discounted rate because I'm sending so much business to them. We have 850 members. They were willing to discount their pricing, same way that our legal um, packages are now discounted. Is like they're willing to take potential loss just on the prospect of business. Other people, if they're quoting really low prices, I question what they're doing because the cost of delivering a Q of E from my days long before starting the lab, it's expensive. It's a lot of work. There's multi teams doing these things, right? And so if your business has inventory, if your business has hard assets, if your business has multiple service lines or product lines, or any kind of complicated financials, works in progress, high capital, working capital needs, those could all benefit from a Q of E. Typically, I think in the lab we kind of talk about deal size. Like if you're under 2 million and it's a pretty small deal, you could probably get away with like a Q of E light financial due diligence package. But higher than that, a Q of E's, I think, a good idea. Now, Walker will say something else, and some of our advisors will say something else. So do what's right for your risk profile. But I feel like people skimp on due diligence and then they bitch and moan when things are missed. And I'm like, what did you expect? Get you what you pay for.
Yep. I'll just echo some of that, Chelsea, that not all Q of E's are created equal at all. There's a wide range here from, like Chelsea said, from the one end of the most basic, which is just kind of making sure things reconcile, all the way to much more sophisticated due diligence. And it depends on your own risk profile and this and the size of your business. But I would just to give you a flavor, I would direct you audience to I'm putting a link to our webinar section on acquiring minds. On that, at that link, you'll see that there's a due diligence section, which are recorded office hours with my business partner in Minds Capital, Max Lummis and his team, LCS. And maybe you could, if you maybe just do the first one there, which is just due diligence office hours, quality of earnings 101, kind of Q of E 101, what's included, how it's priced, what it looks like. Watch that, and if you want the other two, and you'll just by watching them, you'll get a sense of how sophisticated this due diligence can really be and how much value is really there.
There's so much
You're going to
value.
want it. You're going to
Hmm.
want it after you watch it. But I recognize that not every deal justifies a $25,000 Q of E. But after you see what a really good, serious Q of E team can do and does do for your risk mitigation, it's highly desirable.
It is a team. It is a team of CPAs typically,
Yeah.
and inventory specialists and financial analysts, right there. A Q of E will include a level of analysis about the future of the business and industry trends and all kinds of stuff that you're not thinking about that is really helpful. And so we're now getting to a point where people, brokers and seller or brokers and lenders and attorneys and accountants are coming to us because they really like working with our members because the caliber of our members, and they're offering these discounts. And so I wish I would have thought of it sooner, to be honest. But I'm grateful, that it's happened. And so yeah, we have those kind of discounted prices. We have discounts on peer comps. You do a year subscription of Ibis World, um, and we have some other things that are launching. Oh, I was going to announce on this call, I'll be sending out an email to all of our mailing list. We are going to increase our prices in 2025. We've kind of held steady for a couple of years at 8,500, but just in order to continue to deliver the packages that we're delivering, we're going to increase to 10,000. And so that will be happening in next year. Well, I guess in a couple of weeks. And so if you are in the process of considering joining, I know we talked to a gazillion people. Just know that, the prices will go up next year, this coming year.
So is this a call for urgency, Chelsea? If they do it in the next cohort, they can still get it at 8,500, or they can't anyway?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll honor those that are kind of in the works. Will obviously get honored at this rate. I won't spring it on anyone, but like if you're new to applying, next year, then you'll go into the new pricing structure for sure.
Okay. Okay. Also, audience, just want to call your attention to a fairly recent episode I did with Justin Willis. I put a link there in the chat, who bought a contracting business. It utterly collapsed. It's a horror story. There are many things that went wrong, but I do think one of the takeaways from his story is that he didn't pay for a QV. He did kind of his own due diligence. And I think it's fair to say that had he gotten a professional QV, he could have avoided the deal, or structured it appropriately, or what have you. So if you want a lesson in definitely doing QAVs, listen to that episode. It's a great episode. Justin was wonderful to come on. Let's do one more here, Chelsea, because we're at 2:11 or 11, depending on your time zone. Here's one. Get on psychology. Actually, it's a twofer, and then we'll close on this. Any
Okay.
suggestions on repairing a relationship with a broker when you, as searcher, have asked a stupid rookie question and wasted their time?
God, I want to know what the question was, so that I can figure out
It
if
says
it's
he
actually
says
reputable.
he missed a data point in the sim, so I guess he asked something that was in the materials. It was already answered. So I guess he looked sloppy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but you're also human, and humans don't
Mm,
read. So like one missing one data point, it depends on how good the sim was, is kind of understandable. So it could just be a douchey, broker if they're being rude to you. But it is a crowded market. just own it, right? Say, oh
Mm,
my, I apologize. I did read the sim. I must have missed it. My bad. Like, be human. I was just talking to my kids at the school about owning your mistakes, right? Like, there's so much rapport that is built in vulnerability and honesty and authenticity, that just saying, I'm so embarrassed, I should have missed that." Like, it goes a really
yeah.
long way. But we do a lot of around branding with our members. And I knew it was important when Walker and I built it, but like I know it's important now because that's why people are coming to us. And so I would love to say like that one thing will repair your brand, but like there's so much that I talked about in the um last office hours that's really critical to branding that like I don't know if that's enough, right? Because I don't know what your brand is. And so I don't want to act like that's like a magic wand, but I will say it goes a long way to just be vulnerable and own your mistakes. Um, but I would also say watch the first part and make sure you're doing some of the other stuff we talked about from a branding perspective. If you
Yeah.
really want to get on top of it, then consider, looking into the lab and what we do in the intensive.
Yeah. I also think that there's another point here, which you touched on, Chelsea, without knowing exactly what this person's bad question was. It's hard to say, but it may just be like if you've owned it, apologized, and this broker is still treating you like you're the jerk, it's likely that the broker is a jerk. And so the bigger question here is what your strategy, if you really want this business or you really want to move forward with this deal, what your overall strategy should be with dealing with a difficult broker, because this isn't the first time they're going to be difficult. If they're so it
Yeah,
basically, yeah.
I I I don't know that anyone's gonna love my answer to this because I know that everyone's goal is to buy a business. But we also have the right to protect our peace and to choose who we interact with. And just because a broker is representing a deal you like doesn't mean that that's the deal for you, because
Mm,
that broker is going to be a pain in the ass the entire time you're
right,
interacting.
right.
And you're going to be fighting a current of an asshole broker the entire time. And who knows if you'll even be able to close or if they'll continue to just underwrite the current. And so sometimes Chelsea's opinion is it's best to cut bait. The lab members roast me after these because I screw up the idiom
I
so
think that's
bad,
right. I think that
but
one's
I
right.
think that
Cut
might
bait.
be right. And so if not, I love you guys too. And so yeah, it might be best to just cut bait and move on, right? Because again, the whole point to buying a business is you're trying to do it as quickly as you can and as efficiently as you can. And sometimes I just wonder if fighting that current is really the best use of your time. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, great. And then this person's second half of this person's question or second question. Any recommendations to help a spouse who has relied on you meaning you, the searcher, you, the person wanting to buy a business, they've relied on you for 90% of the family income for the duration of the relationship, and now is feeling fear, threat, anger, I guess, because you now want to buy a business. I think I have this right. And you might be feeling similar things yourself. Um, I guess maybe I'm putting words in this questioner's mouth, but I guess maybe a spouse who really doesn't love that you're doing this. Um, how to help a spouse, how to help that
yeah.
spouse get
So
accepted or get on board.
this is part of the reason why. So like a lot of the things I do with the business model of the lab don't make a lot of business sense, to be honest, like lifetime membership and all that stuff. But the other piece is that we encourage spouses to come through it together and we won't charge for the spouse, right? Like if the spouse isn't going to be a buyer, if they're just there, we'll ask them to go through it, because if you can get your spouse to be a part of the learning process, it will stop feeling like it's happening to them and start feeling like it's happening with them, and empower them in the situation and try to give some power back to them and help them build momentum and excitement about it. And so we have a lot of spouses go through the program together because ultimately I just want you guys to succeed. And I think that that is such a critical component, is having that alignment. If your spouse isn't on board, I would almost encourage you to back off until they're on board, because it is going to be one of the most stressful situations you'll ever be in your entire life. And I tell this, and I said this, I think, on the last call when we talk about risk stacking, the worst thing you could possibly do is to light both sides of your life on fire, right? Your professional and your personal life, because it's going to be really hard for you to succeed at either. And if you're taking on personally guaranteed debt, that is a hell of a risk to take, and potentially your marriage, right? So like there's a high likelihood um, that one of them will break, the business or your marriage. And so I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that you guys need to be aligned. But I have seen it time and again where lab members will bring their spouses in, and being a part of that energy. It's actually, I just did it with my husband. Not that my husband um, doesn't support me with the lab, but we're in year 5. I've always been the primary breadwinner in our family. He is a career person and early in his career at that. And he didn't understand any of this. It's just not part of his wiring. And so 3 years into having the lab, I joined a community of business owners. And they did a retreat in Mexico in April, and I took him with me. And it was completely life changing for our family, for him to see, as he said, like me in my element, and me being able to be me with a bunch of people like me with the same goals, got him thinking about entrepreneurship and for our family. And it's the same thing. And so I'll encourage everybody to try to bring their partner with them on the process, because it's ultimately the foundation of success for you.
Wise words.
Or they're just my words. I don't know if they're wise or not. Y'all can tell me later.
No, I'll just echo. I mean, I think that first of all, I've had a lot of requests for an episode or sort of a panel where I have the spouses of searchers come on and I interview the spouses. And in fact, Rick and Royce, the authors of the book that
Yep.
competes with Walker's book, the HBR
HBR, we
book.
can say it. Yep.
um, they they were recently on the podcast, but in our pre-call they had talked about that they actually did this. They do a session like this, like just a Zoom call with students, where they basically have the spouses of some of their students talk, not spouses with the searcher, just the spouses. Anyway, the point is that this is the involvement of spouses and partners on this journey is doesn't get enough attention, and is in fact a huge feature of this. If you do happen to be married or have a partner, is a huge feature of this, because it will consume your life for a while, and you need to have them be on board. So
Yep.
yeah. Great. Well, everybody, I'm wrapping up here. You got another 30 seconds to review the links in the chat. Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn there. Go get the Insights course from the Acquisition Lab that otherwise costs $99. You can get it free there as an attendee to this webinar. Text that number with the word apply to connect with Julio, who will be a human that you speak with about the lab. Prices are going up in 2025 from 8,500 to 10,000.
What any
Yeah.
questions I did not answer, I will answer either in written format like
Yes.
I did Friday. Sorry for the delay. Or I'll send little clips if they're topical, and I'll just get that out to you guys to review. So if I didn't answer your question, I promise I will. Um, hopefully not. Hopefully it won't take as long as the last one did.
Yeah. It's a great thing that Chelsea does. So we didn't get to all the questions, and then Chelsea does a video recording answering the questions that we didn't have a chance to get to today. Really wonderful thing that you do there, Chelsea. Super. And somebody asked me where are the slides available to download. So when this is posted to the Acquiring Minds website, this recording will also have the slides linked there as well. You'll get all that by email. If you happen to miss it, go to the Acquiring Minds website. The next few days, you'll see it there. Anything else, Chelsea?
That's all. If you guys need anything, I'm always here. You can email me at that email address, or I would say message me on LinkedIn, but I'm really bad. Will is trying to get me to be better at LinkedIn. But yeah, email me or find me on LinkedIn.
It's Chelsea at Buy Then Build. Oh, did you have it on the slide? Chelsea
Yeah,
at
it's
Buy
on the
Then Build.
screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there it is at the bottom. Great. Super.
Yep.
Chelsea Wood, thank you so much. Excellent job. Excellent office hours. We'll see you next time. January, we don't have the next one decided yet, but watch for it, everybody. It'll come in January.
Thank
See you
you.
then. Thank you, everyone. This concludes the webinar. Bye.
Bye-bye.